Welcome to another episode of Conduct Detrimental. Dan Lust joined this week. We have a ton of people this week. We have Evan Mattel, Stephanie Weissenberger, and then Matt Tympanick's going to join us. Landis Barber is going to join us, and then obviously Conlan Farrells. But we're going to be guiding this episode by myself, Evan, and Stephanie. Let's do a collective, guys. How's it going, gang?
It's going pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, it's going good. Coming up on finals week soon, so I'm powering through that.
Counting down the days till Christmas, December 1st today when we're recording, getting excited. Santa's coming to town.
Very, very exciting. As a programming note, we would love to ideally just pick if we were a football show, we could just do a podcast on Mondays, recapping everything on Sunday, and then maybe an episode on Thursday, previewing the stuff for the weekend. But we never know where the sports law stories are going to pop up. We actually never know when they're going to pop up. So we try to react to when we have massive stories or an accumulation of a lot of stories. So this is going to be one of those episodes. We have a lot of stories to cover across the sports world, across the legal world, a lot of different practice areas. So I wanted to bring in the heavy hitters. Dan Wallach and I just recorded a kind of sports betting, sports legislative focused episode. So now this is one of these episodes, we call them the potpourri episodes. Stephanie, you and I used to do a lot of these back in the day before you got your fancy job at Major League Baseball Network. Congrats, by the way.
Thank you.
So yeah, let's jump into it. So here's the general roadmap for today. We're going to be talking about the USA-Iran flag saga. We'll talk a little bit of the World Cup. Certainly it's going on as you're listening to this. Number two, we're going to get into a little bit of some updates on the NIL front, a topic we didn't discuss last week, but obviously still relevant. That's the Olivia Dunne LSU battle against the New York Times, if we want to call it that. And then this is the week where Deshaun Watson returns. So the three of us are going to break that down. And then, with Matt Tympanick, our resident DA, and Landis Barber, one of our top writers on our site, we're going to talk about Antonio Brown, arrest warrant issued for his arrest. Jalen Kitna, son of Jon Kitna, who is a Florida Gators quarterback, gets trouble on, I hate saying it, but it's child porn charges, possession and distribution, really kind of unheard of and unprecedented stuff. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the antitrust case in the college baseball world with college baseball coaches, and then the college football expansion and a little bit of Michigan State. So I did say we're going to cover a lot of stuff in sports. We are going to cover a lot of stuff in sports. So we try to make a show for sports lawyers that are obsessed with sports fans that are obsessed with all things sports. So we're certainly going across the globe with this. Speaking of across the globe, the United States won a big game against Iran, 1-0. I'm sure we were all watching it on the edge of our seats. Now, before the game started, we had an international crisis. Evan, you want to lay out kind of what happened with this flag saga, what rules were in effect here? I think it's pretty relevant as we continue our World Cup coverage here.
Yeah, sure. So just to give context for those who don't know, the United States men's football team displayed a graphic with the group, which consists of England, Iran, the USA, and Wales. And they made the conscious decision to omit the symbol from the Iranian flag. That symbol is four curves, a sword between them, and it represents the holy verse, "There is no God but Allah." This is, I would assume, in support of the protests going on in Iran. So an Iran media source backfired on that because they believe that technically that is a violation of FIFA's charter. So I'm going to review a brief kind of excerpt from it. So it's the FIFA disciplinary code. It's 13.1. Any person who offends the dignity or integrity of a country through contemptuous, discriminatory, or derogatory words or actions on account of race, skin, color, ethnic, national, social origin, etc., or any other reason shall be sanctioned with a suspension lasting at least 10 matches. So the Iranian media calls for FIFA to suspend the United States for 10 matches. Do I think that's going to happen? Probably not, especially considering the round of 16 is coming up Saturday. But there's your context. So something to watch at least, see if FIFA at least warrants a response to that.
Can I ask this, Stephanie? I think you have the same question, right? Like, was the USA team behind this? Like, did Iran have any responses to the players? Like, what happened on the actual, soccer level between the coaches and players? Like, does anyone have their fingerprint on it one way or the other?
Based on my understanding, essentially the players and the coach and basically the U.S. men's national team actually were unaware of the USSF's decision to, alter the image of the Iranian flag. And in fact, the Iran team actually at a press conference, one of the captains of the team basically said that they refused to meet the country's president before the tournament. And they also abstained from singing the national anthem in their opening match against England. And they're kind of supporting these protests that are going on in support of women's rights. So I think that kind of goes to show that I highly doubt that FIFA is going to actually implement this proposed 10-game suspension, especially considering it's kind of being called out by an Iran state-affiliated news agency. And the Iranian team, for the most part, is not upset by this.
I don't know if this is controversial, but I told a friend that I would make this point. You really can't say on Twitter, like, let's keep sports and politics separate. And for good reason. There are a lot of good causes that can be kind of pumped up through sports, like a lot of good political causes. Like, Steph, you followed, I know you were at a firm that used to represent Giannis. Like, I remember what the Milwaukee Bucks players did once upon a time. They walked out in the middle of the controversy surrounding the Milwaukee shooting. So, like, I support how players use their platform if they want. If it's the players' decisions to make a statement, like, I'm totally fine with that. If the coach wants to make a statement, I'm probably fine with that. Like, for the United States Soccer Federation to force the players and the coaches into a political controversy, like, seems so odd to me, let alone like the fact that we're entering a really big soccer game, right? We're playing Iran. Like, the chance of us getting eliminated was actually over 50%. If they would have won or tied, we would have lost. Like, what was the need at that point to like start that? And if you did want to start, at least consult with your players. You can make a sports and politics issue. Like, I don't really mind blending those two things. Like, I know maybe that's controversial, but like, if you're going to do it, you really have to have the players and coaches prepared for it. What ended up happening is that this kind of Twitter storm hit the presses, and then like players that were at the podium didn't really expect it to happen. Just a point of emphasis, just to like bring it home, right? Tyler Adams was asked, the captain of the United States men's national team, was asked like kind of like an uncomfortable question in response to this. Certainly, I don't think it sends the right message that like United States Soccer Federation had to issue a statement clarifying the statement they were even making. So again, I'm not sure who the statement's for, but once they clarified that they were making a statement with respect to the treatment of women in Iran, then Tyler Adams is at the podium. He doesn't expect this to happen. He's asked kind of a really kind of hostile question from a member of the Iran media, asking like, hey, what does it feel like to be playing for a country that has such a terrible track record, with respect to African Americans? Like, how do you feel about that? Like, I don't know, Evan, like, he had a good response, Adams, but like, it's a bad situation we put in.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you made a lot of good points, especially the fact that the social media team didn't, or at least seems like it didn't, they consult the players or the coaches. So kind of leading them to that ambush on the media. And then, yeah, Tyler Adams, who's 23, so he's my age, with an extremely mature response, first of all, mispronouncing the country's name, and then going on to say that he's learned from living abroad the past couple of years and fitting in different cultures that the U.S. is continuing to make progress, and that's the most important thing. So a really composed, really charismatic response, and a very appropriate one at a question that could definitely be seen pretty hostile to a younger player. So someone who is still kind of figuring out life and these issues and probably hasn't thought about it on such a large scale. So very impressed with that answer. Disappointed in the overall media event that took place at that point.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And one thing that, for getting into kind of the nitty gritty of legal analysis and just the way that you want to draft iron tight rules and regulations as well as contracts, is the rule that apparently has been violated actually says any person who offends the dignity or integrity of a country. So, there could be an argument made that USSF, although they are a member of FIFA, they're not a person, they are an entity, and it's not like any individual or collective group of players on the United States men's national team made any sort of comments of this similar nature. So, if you're just looking at the rule on its face, I wouldn't classify USSF as a person, and they're the ones who arguably offended the dignity of Iran.
I don't think anything's going to happen. I think by the letter of the law, I think you were right, Steph. I think the rule that Evan read out earlier, it's like somebody associated with the United States Soccer Federation, that's the entity that controls the United States men's national team. Like, they put it out there. Maybe people are playing dumb and saying that they weren't involved with it. I'm not really sure. I felt like if you're going to make a statement, right, like in the walk off the court, like, Giannis, we knew exactly what was meant in that particular moment, that the world was more important than sports. I mean, maybe call me crazy, and I don't know if you guys want to fess up to it either, but like, I saw that graphic. I didn't necessarily know what statement it was making, other than just poking the bear of an opponent that we're about to play. You can make any number of statements about Iran, right? But like, I don't know, for the United States to make that statement, England didn't make it, Wales didn't make it, those players didn't have to deal with that. I just felt it was an unnecessary distraction. And to belly the point, right, like, they didn't even clear that with the coaches and players. It just seemed like such an odd look. And maybe to your point, Steph, maybe it's some back channel, like damage control, and that everyone's claiming they didn't know about it. But I don't know, just such an odd look. So, United States advances, but we didn't gain any more friends in international waters. I don't think people love the United States already, and certainly they don't like us more after that controversy. So let's put a pin in that conversation. Now I think it's time to move over to NIL. A reminder, our show is sponsored by the law firm of Orr, Horgan, and Flengy. They are our college sports sponsors. So we try to talk about college sports at least once a week, thanks to our sponsors, Orr, Horgan, and Flengy. That is the top Nebraska law firm, but also your source for college sports issues. If you have college sports issues on a school level, on a player level, on a collective level, or as they say in Nebraska, a collaborative level, certainly those are the guys to go to. Reach out to me. I'm happy to put you in touch. Those were my friends that sponsored my trip to Nebraska once upon a time. So good friends of ours over there, Orr, Horgan, and Flengy. Okay. Let's stick in the NIL world, in the college sports space for our sponsor, Orr, Horgan, and Flengy. A story that was pretty big about a week or so ago. We were figuring when we wanted to cover it, when the waters would die down. I think it's right now. The kind of dust has settled, and I think people are still as angry as they were when the story first broke. So Olivia Dunne is a name that we brought up on our podcast a couple times. Olivia Dunne is, I think, the most followed athlete on social media. She's a gymnast for LSU. People can look her up online. I think she's approaching somewhere between 5 and 10 million followers. Someone can fact check us on that. So she's in no shortage of media stories in the last year and change since the social media or the NIL era broke out. But what happened recently put her in the headlines, I think, for the wrong reasons, not to no fault of her own. Steph, I know it's a story that you feel you have some strong thoughts on. Let me turn it to you. It's a New York Times story. It's a profile of Olivia Dunne and female athletes. I'll leave it at that. But Steph, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I saw the story. I thought it was disgusting. I mean, the title kind of says it all. It's new endorsements for college athletes resurface an old concern, sex sells. And then the author kind of goes into it and describes Dunne as a petite blonde with a bright smile and a gymnast toned physique. And then, briefly touches on the fact that she has 8 million followers on Instagram and TikTok and is one of the highest earning athletes for NIL purposes. But I mean, I think anyone who reads the article should have an eerie, uncomfortable feeling about it.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off Steph there, to me, this is just the wrong way to go about this. I mean, at the end of the day, she's an athlete. Yes, she's attractive, but that's part of being an NIL deal. And I don't think that her physical appearance should be considered a negative in the growth of women's sports as a whole. I actually think it's a positive. I think that someone like her, who's become so popular on social media, exposes more people to women's sports. And I mean, I think especially I was upset to see Stanford women's basketball coach Tara Vanderveer come out and basically say the same thing, that this was a step back in women's sports because she's using her image rather than her athletic ability. So yeah, I mean, I'm upset at the way that this was handled. I think NIL is important. I think women's exposure to NIL and sports in general is important. So I don't understand the backlash on this. She's an athlete. She's attractive, yes, but she's an athlete, and that's what people recognize her for.
Let's address the elephant, right? Like, if you're going to have a lot of followers on social media, like, I can certainly assure you, right, it's not going to hurt, right, to be attractive, whether you're a male or a female. Like, those are generally the most followed people online, unless you're famous from something or some shape or form, or like that's where you're funny, right? You have some particular skill set. Like, the fact, if somebody told me that, the most followed athletes in men or women's sports happen to be very attractive and were models, right? Like, not going to shock me. So Steph, to your point, like, I imagine that, and I'm reading a lot of the backlash online, people should, I mean, if people can find the original article on Twitter, there's so much backlash against the author here, but it seems by all indications, and Olivia Dunne handled it pretty, I think, with class. She didn't say anything. She maybe somewhat alluded to it in a post, but didn't really call the author out. But it seems like she got ambushed. It seems like she sat down for a real interview and a real photo shoot about her NIL success. She's one of the most successful NIL athletes, and then she gets hit with this headline that's sex sells, and these kind of gross descriptive terms. Like, can't you just be someone that's a very heavily followed athlete? Maybe you're not selling sex. Like, maybe you just happen to be someone that's attractive and you happen to be a gymnast. Like, I don't love where the conversation got. And then Evan, to your point, I don't know, that I did not expect a women's basketball coach to come out and speak out against Olivia Dunne. That she seems to be the leader of the NIL movement on the female side. Like, that seems to be someone that would be helpful for women's sports.
Yeah, no, I agree with that to some extent. I think the main issue and main conclusion that I got from the article is that, women as a whole want to, I guess, be successful on their merits and based on the skills that they bring to a particular industry. And so, just basically saying that Livvy Dunne has gotten $7-8 million in deals, the article kind of makes the assumption that she's only gotten it because of her looks and because of the types of photos that she's posting online, without really touching on maybe her athletic abilities and other skills and the type of person she is. So I definitely understand, the backlash on this article and how it might be, 2, 3, 4 steps in the wrong direction, because women have been objectified for quite some time. And I think it's all about just empowering them to move forward, but for other people in the world to also appreciate and acknowledge the skill set as, the primary factor, as opposed to looks as the factor.
So the only thing I'll say, and I'm certainly not going to disagree with anything you said, but like the first overall pick in the draft, right? So the first overall pick in the baseball draft, the football draft, like basketball draft, that person doesn't always have the most followers. It's someone that has a skill set of being very good at social media. And like, that is how I read Livvy Dunne. Livvy Dunne and the Cavender twins. Like I listened to ESPN Daily's interview with the Cavender twins, the women's basketball stars that went to Fresno, transferred to Miami. Like they worked during like the COVID-19 pandemic of like doing special like content that was specifically curated for TikTok, building up that following. Like that's its own skill set, being able to like, it's not just appearance based. Like maybe that helps to some extent, but you have to be very good and have engaging content. Like we as Conduct Detrimental are somewhat in the business. We're not nearly at the extent that they are, but like we put out content, we try to be engaging, we try to find topics that people are interested in. And if you were Livvy Dunne, like, and you're able to demand that same type of like, marketing dollars that maybe the number one overall pick in the NBA draft can, like, I don't know. It just seems to be like apples and oranges. Livvy Dunne is not getting 8-figure deals because she's attractive. She's getting it because she happens to be very good at social media. And then beyond that, like there's obviously some additional factors, but to cheapen it just by saying it's sex, like that's not really fair. I don't think that's fair to anybody.
Yeah, I agree with you. You kind of beat me to it. I was going to bring up the fact that, there's plenty of athletes that I'm sure are as attractive or more attractive than Livvy Dunne, and I have not done the marketing that she's done. So, all credit to her. She found this NIL and found a way to make a substantial amount of money, and she's athletically talented. So there's plenty of other people that could take a page out of her book, and this should be celebrated as an opportunity for people to bust into this space rather than, oh, we took a step back. I think they're trying to paint it like they took a step back when really this is a great step forward for young athletes.
Maybe we could close on this again. Like anyone that's on social media knows that there are people that are actually selling sex. Like Livvy Dunne is not selling sex. Like she's a gymnast. Like that's what she's selling. She's just selling maybe the lifestyle like of being a college athlete. That I found to be the most offensive part. Like she's not selling sex. Like you scroll enough around on Instagram or Twitter, you'll run into some content that is not safe for work. Like that's not what's being sold here. And I think that really cheapened it. And an audience that's not sports specific, that's just like a generalist audience, I'm sure they saw that New York Times headline and assumed that Livvy Dunne had a very different social media portfolio than she actually does. I didn't think that was fair. Steph, do you want the last word here?
Yeah, no, I think we also forget that as a gymnast, your uniform is a leotard. So what are you supposed to do if that's what you're being required to wear for your sport? What are you going to post photos of you being a gymnast and showing your routines when in competition you have to wear a leotard? That's kind of something that I think maybe the author of the article forgot about, honestly.
Yeah, I think we've all hit it. I just don't think it was fair. And, maybe the reporting was good in the middle. I'm not going to knock that. The guy, we're not going to mention his name here. People can do the research and look up the article. But yeah, I mean, I think it was the headline that really, really just rubbed people the wrong way. Okay, so let's pause here, the three of us. We're going to bring in a conversation we had with Matt Tympanick and Landis Barber. Again, we're going to talk about Antonio Brown, an arrest warrant issued for his arrest. Talk about Jalen Kitna, the quarterback over at Florida, the antitrust lawsuit involving college baseball coaches, expanded college football playoffs, and a little bit of Michigan State, some developments on the criminal front. So loaded episode. I don't know if we've ever done more topics in one particular episode. So we will enter in Matt Tympanick and Landis Barber. Okay, we have on Matt Tympanick and Landis Barber. We are going to go around the sports law world as best as we can. Matt, as people know, our resident DA, and Landis, you've become one of our most frequent writers on the site, so always love your coverage. So let's do this. Matt, a story that is now kind of picked up national traction, a guy that we haven't spoken about in a little bit, but he is no stranger to our show, Antonio Brown, went from being a first ballot Hall of Famer. And then all of a sudden he left Pittsburgh and 4 different teams in 4 years. He is now out of the league. We could talk about upwards of 10 lawsuits, sexual assault allegations, faking COVID vaccines, medical malpractice claims. He is a walking, I was going to say a walking lawsuit, but he's around the space. So here's the update, Matt, and I certainly want you to unpack this. There are reports, and it could be imminent, that an arrest warrant was issued for Antonio Brown. I'm going to give it to you. I don't think that surprises anybody, but the actual allegations here are something new. And obviously it's a little concerning, the pattern of litigation events surrounding Brown. So Matt, I will give you the runway. You are a resident DA. You can certainly break this down much better than I can.
So it is Thursday, and as such, there's another Antonio Brown is in the news for another legal situation story. This one is out of Hillsborough County, where Antonio Brown's fiancé has filed battery charges against Antonio Brown. So what I've seen on social media is, and I don't know if it's true, this is just hearsay, the police are trying to execute the search warrant down in Fort Lauderdale where Antonio Brown lives, but he's kind of barricaded himself in. There's an arrest warrant out for an incident involving his ex-fiancée where he allegedly threw a shoe at her and tried to do a landlord self-help eviction. If we want to go really into law school terms, of course, you can't do that, and threw a shoe at her as such, and then law enforcement filed a arrest warrant for domestic battery against Antonio Brown. So the way it works in Florida is when there's a domestic battery arrest warrant, Antonio Brown has to be in jail and he has to go see a judge before he can bond out. He has a 0 bond warrant. So once he's arrested, he cannot be released until he sees a judge. Can't be like, but I'm Antonio Brown, you got to let me out. No, that's not how it works. He has to be transported back to Hillsborough County, where he's going to get a first appearance where a judge is going to set bond. Given his history, his legal issues, everything is being alleged, he is going to get a monetary bond. They're not going to be like, well, Mr. Brown, you've definitely shown that you can show up for court, that you can follow the laws of the state of Florida. We're going to release you on your own recognizance. That's not what's going to happen. He's very likely going to get a bond of $5,000 to $10,000. And then from there, the state attorney's office in Hillsborough County is going to make a filing decision about whether this case is going to go forward. It depends on what the facts and circumstances is. If it's just him throwing a shoe and hitting her, probably shouldn't get filed. It may just because he's Antonio Brown, but I don't really see it going anywhere because a jury is going to be looking at it like, all right, was the victim hurt? Is this in front of the children? What are we actually doing here? So a lot is going to depend on that because there is situations where you have to serve 5 days in jail if a battery occurs in front of children.
Let me ask you this. I mean, this is, maybe it's for you, Landis. Like, I'm not in my practice, I don't deal with gun charges at all. I would think, right, Matt, isn't there a question here as to whether or not his guns are going to be taken away?
Yes, Tampa police tried to do a risk protection order, but it was denied by the judge. However, he should have probably already had his guns taken away because he has been convicted of a felony battery. And under federal law, if you've been convicted of a domestic violence crime, you should have your guns taken away.
So, like, I guess, Landis, I'm not sure. You don't do criminal law either, correct?
No.
Like, we're all sports fans here. Like, doesn't it kind of alarm you, like, Antonio Brown's mental health at this point, like, just from the progression of events that we've seen? I mean, I just rattled off like 15 of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at what happened when he was running off the field and now this. I mean, this is alarming for teams, for athletes. And it's not only this, it's what's been going on around social media and other things. And this just adds to the list as alarming things for Antonio Brown's mental health and what's been going on in not only his professional life, but his personal life as well.
Well, I guess, the point, I don't know, again, and hopefully it's not controversial here, but someone with mental health issues, like established mental health issues, probably shouldn't be owning guns. And, right, I did some deep diving into the Antonio Brown stuff. I think police have been called to, for incidents. I think it's a longtime girlfriend, maybe ex-fiance, current fiance. I'm not really sure on that. But yes, someone might be like saying like, hey, someone threw a shoe and it hit, someone's ponytail. Like, why are we talking about taking someone's guns away? Again, that's not why we're talking about it. It's this really alarming progression of criminal events, right? There was a story, maybe it's 2-3 years ago at this point, but Brown, while he was a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers, throwing furniture out of a 13-story building and almost hitting a small child. There's 3 different allegations of sexual assault floating out there with different women. There's, non-payment lawsuits going all over the place. it's just evidence of someone really absolutely losing control. So, if the police get called to Antonio Brown's house, right, at this point, they expect the worst with the progression that we've seen. So, Matt, I mean, it's obviously very early on. I mean, I was doing a hit earlier with the station that they were talking about police were outside of Antonio Brown's residence. They were expecting a standoff. Like, where do we go from here with Antonio Brown with this case, or just in general? Like, what does the law do with someone that just keeps, hitting the wrong type of radars?
So it's also possible that they could initiate what's called a Baker Act, which is move them into like temporary mental institution and figure out what to do with there. I don't think it would stick very long, but with Antonio Brown's history, I think it's relatively clear that he has some mental issues, potentially having to do from football in this case and like CT and stuff like that. The only thing I thought of after I said it is the reason he'd have guns, because he did plead to a crime of felony battery, which is a felony and you can't have guns. It would have to be only because it was a withhold of adjudication, meaning he technically wasn't convicted. That's the only way he would be able to have guns. Otherwise, it's possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, which is a second-degree felony.
Matt, what's interesting is that this is all occurring on the week that Deshaun Watson returns. You got any thoughts on that or anything?
I think that we got two completely different situations. With Deshaun Watson, we had sexual assault. The grand jury decided that criminal charges wouldn't be filed. And by sheer happenstance, what are the chances that his first game back is against the Houston Texans? But I think we've covered that previously. But with Antonio Brown, I feel like we can't go a month without hearing his name for he did this, or he posted this picture with Tom Brady leaving.
He posted
Giselle's
a
house.
Photoshop picture of Giselle without her clothes on. Like, who is in Antonio Brown's like circle? I mean, that's where I think people need to people come to this and they're not really following it as closely as we are. Antonio Brown has been a lightning rod of sports law cases, but for Antonio Brown, like, I don't know, us as sports fans, we're seeing like this is a guy who was literally a first ballot Hall of Famer, maybe at one point not just the best wide receiver in football, but the best player in football. And now, he's just kind of gone off the deep end. It does not resemble the person that was such a successful NFL athlete for the Steelers for nearly a decade. But, we digress, but we have to talk about these stories on the other end of it. Now, here's another one for you, Matt, in your neck of the woods in Florida. So, okay, we have a former athlete's son, Jon Kitna, who's a pretty well-decorated quarterback in the NFL. I'm not sure if he's making the Hall of Fame or anything like that, but we have Jon Kitna's son, Jalen Kitna, quarterback at the University of Florida. Matt, you put this one on my radar. It's a case and a topic that I don't think we've ever covered on our show, but the oddity of it being a college athlete being wrapped up in a child pornography possession, distribution, exploitation case. Again, we don't pick the topics here, but sometimes, the sports law world picks them for us. So, Matt, what's the latest on this? And I'm hearing maybe Jon Kitna was testifying at a hearing today.
So according to TMZ, and they have photos from the first appearance. So like I stated in Antonio Brown's case, when you were arrested of a crime, if it is egregious nature, child porn definitely qualifies. You have to be brought in front of a judge, and a judge decides what your bond is going to be if you're going to receive one. In this case, Jon Kitna appeared and stated that his son Jalen could live with his wife and him in Texas during the pendency of the case, and that he wouldn't use the internet, and he has no unsupervised contact with minors. The judge agreed and allowed him a bond in the amount of $80,000. The way it works when you're dealing with a bail bondsman is either you put up 10%, so you got to put it down $8,000. That is to the bondsman, and the bondsman pays the rest. Or you could pay the whole thing, and if you appear, that all comes back to you minus any fees and costs if you were actually tried. So that is what is actually looking at here. These are very, very serious charges. Jalen Kitna probably doesn't have any criminal history but this. However, right off the bat, when I did his score sheet, because he has 2 second-degree felonies punishable by up to 15 years and 3 third degrees punishable by up to 5 years each. He scores 16.9 months in prison, meaning pending a departure, there has to be a prison sentence. So right now, I believe the first initial offer would probably be 2 to 3 years in prison for Jalen Kitna.
It's somewhat dark. I mean, it's obviously very dark. Obviously, they're all allegations, innocent until proven guilty. There was a guy we talked about in the podcast about a month ago, a guy by the name of Luke Heimlich, who was a 15-year-old, was accused of sexually molesting his 6-year-old niece. 2 occasions. Really kind of gross case. The guy ends up going to Oregon State, is one of the best pitchers in the entire country. And then, right, doesn't get drafted. And we never hear of Luke Heimlich again. He goes to some, foreign league and doesn't do anything. But my question to you, Matt, I don't know if you know this, Landis, like Jalen Kitna doesn't seem to have that type of NFL or the same type of draft stock. Luke Heimlich was a guy that probably would have gone in the first round. Jalen Kitna, I have not heard any whispers of him being drafted, let alone being a first round guy. So
Luke Heimlich, he played for that Oregon State baseball team, didn't he? And
he did.
He was a leader on that Oregon State baseball team, and probably that team was very good and might have won the College World Series.
Right. And he's not Anthony Richardson, for those that don't know. I mean, that's the starter over at Florida. I mean, Matt, again, it's certainly serious charges, but is this getting headlines because it's unique and it's never happened before? Or is it because it's Jon Kitna's son? I'm just trying to figure out where we draw.
I think it's two separate things. The most important thing is Florida Gators fans, you probably shouldn't listen to the next part. Anthony Richardson is probably not playing in the bowl game. Though it's not a college football playoff game, it's still a bowl game where a lot of money is at stake and bragging rights. Anthony Richardson is probably not going to play. He's pretty solidified himself as a mid to late first round draft pick, depending on what he does in the combine. However, Jalen Kitna was going to be the quarterback for that game, and he's not going to be playing in that game. I can tell you that right now. So now Florida's on their third string quarterback in a game. I don't even know who Florida's even playing in that game, but probably not a game they're going to win now with your third string quarterback. However, looking at these facts and circumstances, what is very unique about this case is that it deals with child exploitation. The allegations are, remember, these are just allegations. He is on Discord and he shares a child pornographic image and people report it on him. That's how this all happens. When he's actually asked by law enforcement, his response, well, yeah, but it was on the internet, so I just assumed it was legal. All right, two things. One, never assume anything is legal because it's on the internet. Child pornography still exists on the internet. Second, don't ever speak to law enforcement without an attorney and never admit to anything. That's some free legal advice Thursday. I know I'm a day bit early.
Yeah, Matt, it's good analysis here. And I think, obviously for our college public, I mean, I was kind of setting you up. I've never heard of this. For better or for worse, I've literally never heard of these allegations happening to a collegiate athlete. Luke Heimlich was a little bit different. Obviously involved some type of actions, but in this day and age, right, in 2022, using Discord to share materials like that, like let alone just let's pretend, right, that the person was of age, right, that's being alleged here. Like, how dumb can you be? Right. You're an athlete, right? Everything is public. Everything you say and do can be held against you forever. Even if this wasn't something that rose to a criminal act, like just the fact of someone sharing those type of photos on a public, server like that. Matt, was it a public server? Is it a public Discord?
Yes, it was. And that's the worst part about it. Some of the people saw it on there. It's like, hey, you shouldn't do that. And then they report it to Discord, and Discord reports it to the national.
What was the chat? Like, what was the forum involved?
I don't even know. Like, what I saw was what Gaines, it was like almost like a statement that was sent to me on Twitter. I forwarded it to AJ Perez. He already had it as well. It kind of explained the facts and situations. He's on Discord and he finds this image, and for whatever reason, he shares it on Discord. And it's terrible to do it, but to share it with people you don't even know. I don't know what's going through his head. What I can tell you is this. This may be his saving grace. Right now, he scores prison. Their offer is going to be prison. Why? Because they're going to assume he's a rich kid who got everything handed to him. Why? He's Jon Kitna's son, and his father made $32 million, according to Spot Rack, in his NFL career. However, what he has going for him is this. He is still 19 years of age. In the state of Florida, we have a departure which is called youthful offender, which is a departure which allows the judge, based on his age, as long as he pleads before his 21st birthday, to depart just based on what the judge decides and make up any kind of deal that they want. Otherwise, if you were older, it's a guarantee he's probably doing 3 to 5 years in prison. But given his age, he might, if he's lucky, get away with just jail time. But I don't know if it depends on what the images are, because if they are what I've read is that they were a child being sexually exploited. If they are extremely egregious, as it is being reported, I don't see how a judge is like, I think you need to see the inside of a prison cell. Not jail cell, a prison cell. And for those wondering, there is a difference. Jail is where you go for low-level felonies and misdemeanors, usually local. Prison is where the serious offenders go. And that is going to absolutely be on the table for Jalen Kitna in this case.
I mean, the other reason we bring this up, obviously, we give out advice on the show. Matt, you've laid it out as easily as one could. Don't be stupid online, right? Don't send things to a Discord and we're not having the situation. Jon Kitna, right, doesn't need his name dragged through the mud. He had a pretty successful NFL career. Now his son, like I haven't thought of Jon Kitna in years. And now Jon Kitna's coming up because of something his son did. Nothing to do with his playing career. So it is what it is. Okay. So let's take our DA's hats off for a minute. Let's stay within the world of college sports. Landis, an interesting antitrust lawsuit filed this week involving college baseball coaches. So what do we have going on in that space? I think it's a good time to be attacking the NCAA, but what are you seeing on that front?
Yeah, a lawsuit entitled Smart v. NCAA. The NCAA is back in the news, and it's all because of volunteer baseball coaches. For those that don't know, baseball coaches, NCAA teams, specifically Division I, can have up to 3 paid baseball coaches, and they can also have a 4th volunteer coach, but that volunteer coach is unpaid. And the big issue here in this case, it was brought by 2 former volunteer baseball coaches, and they brought a class action lawsuit on behalf of all others similarly situated. And the big issue here is about they are performing this work, they're unpaid, and they're performing pretty much the same duties as paid coaches, even serving as on-field coaches at times. And that has led to them bringing this class action lawsuit because of what occurred earlier in the 1990s in law versus the NCAA, where the NCAA tried to do something similar.
Well, before we get into law, I think this case needs to be interesting. And just like, we should lay this out a little bit. And recent guest of the show, Amanda Kristovich from Front Office Sports, was one of the people that was kind of on top of this reporting. So Landis, right, in college baseball, the money, we should talk about the money. Like the top baseball coaches get about like $1 million, probably high 6 figures is probably the upper echelon of that range. Some just earning over $1 million. So Landis, is the rule that's in the books. My understanding is that you can have 3 paid baseball coaches. That's it. 4, 5, 6, 7 are unpaid.
That's it. That's right.
So it seems to be, right, an allegation of Section 1 of the Sherman Act that they are kind of putting a restraint on that particular market for their own benefit, right? I mean, it seems like, at least on its face, right, we'll see what is said, seems to be some form of an antitrust violation, that they're really kind of curtailing that market, limiting that market, so there can't be that many paid college coaches.
That's exactly what they're alleging here in this complaint, is that they conspired to fix the compensation of an entire category of college baseball coaches at zero.
And then, so the law case, I haven't dug into it. I'm hoping you might have a little bit. How does that law case factor in? What is it, a 1980s case, law v. NCAA?
Yeah, Law v. NCAA was a 1990s case, and it was a rule. The NCAA had basically done a similar thing, and that's to Division I entry-level coaches. They wanted sort of the compensation to go down for Division I basketball coaches, really. And so they fixed the salary of Division I entry-level coaches to $16,000. That was a rule, a bylaw, and everything. And the district court granted summary judgment in favor of the plaintiffs. It was a similar class action lawsuit brought by a bunch of former Division I entry-level coaches. And they brought a class action lawsuit, and the district court granted summary judgment in favor of the plaintiffs. And the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld it, saying that the NCAA's rule had an anti-competitive effect because it lowered the prices of coaching services, which is very similar to what is going on here in this case.
In the other point we were kind of alluding to, right, in 2021 in that Alston case, we all 3 of us remember very well when the Judge Kavanaugh in the concurring opinion said that the NCAA is not above the law. So if anyone's wondering why the NCAA has not done really, and we've talked about this a bunch on the show, but any type of policing of the NIL era, that might be seen as some form of a restriction on athlete compensation. So under normal antitrust rules, which the NCAA has felt for many years that they were exempt from, that was kind of ripped out of their heart with this Alston case. So the NCAA has not decided to punish anyone on NIL, I think, for the fear that they would get seen as being violative of antitrust law. So now what's being done here in Landis, we should talk about it. This lawsuit is filed by Garrett Brocious, former guest of Conduct Detrimental. Garrett was behind the antitrust lawsuit to try to get minor league baseball players something akin to federal or to minimum wage. And why it's interesting that it's Garrett Brocious of all people. Garrett Brocious played college baseball at a really high level at Missouri with Ian Kinsler and Max Scherzer, guys that we have certainly heard of. He went to play in the minor leagues and, for better or for worse, just never really made this into a full-time career at the major league level. So Okay, it's kind of like that scene in like Billy Madison with Steve Buscemi, like crossing off lists. He's like, I hate minor league baseball. Like, I hate what they do to the minors. I'm going after Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball settles for a big number. Landis, what was it, like 180 million, 160 million?
Yeah, it was up there.
So our friend Garrett, I asked him to come on the show. He said he can't talk to the media at this point in time, which is fine, totally understandable.
Sure.
But he beats Major League Baseball, and I think in a really kind of public way. And now who is he going after? He's setting his sights on the NCAA, because for a period of time when he was at Missouri, a high-level baseball team, could he have been making money during the NIL era? Sure. And then, right, maybe that's number one. And number two, if you can't go pro in baseball, you have to kind of figure out what that next phase of your life's going to be. So for Garrett Brocious, what did he do? He became a lawyer, right? And he joined the ranks of, of the legal profession. Some of his friends, I'm sure, he hasn't told me this, I'm just using, common sense, went to try to be coaches at the high school level or the collegiate level. So somebody asked me, like, why? My understanding is that this coaching restriction is an issue in many sports, not just baseball.
Yeah, it is.
But why is the lawsuit just against baseball? Because, our guy Garrett just sued baseball, Major League Baseball, and now he's going after collegiate baseball. So again, Garrett has not told me that by any means. I'm just putting two and two together. A guy that played baseball at a fairly high level probably knows a lot of baseball players, probably knows a lot of baseball coaches. So that seems to be the reason there. Landis, anything else on this particular case? Obviously, it's day one. They got to certify the class. They got to do a lot of things here.
Yeah, they got a lot of things to do. And once they get past certifying the class, which they likely will, I would anticipate that the NCAA is obviously going to push back a little bit, but this should end in some sort of settlement, probably a confidential settlement. Otherwise, this could, between law v. NCAA and the Austin ruling that NCAA is not above antitrust scrutiny, this could be a bad case for the NCAA. So I would anticipate this one possibly settling.
Okay, we will keep tabs on that one. Let's stick in college sports for one more. Matt, you, funny enough, mentioned that Florida was not playing in a playoff game, in a bowl game. They are certainly not playing in a playoff game. Landis, we have some news on the, I guess we'll call this like, corporate governance, right? There's been a lot of contracts shifted with the Rose Bowl and whatnot to now allow for an expanded college football playoff. Florida is not going to be in it. Sorry to Florida fans. But yeah, why don't you give us maybe just a brief overview? We don't have to get so into it, but this is a college sports show. We try to talk about, issues, contractual issues, NCAA related issues. This does seem to signal a significant power shift in college football, which is obviously, the biggest revenue generator in all of college sports. So what's the latest on the college football playoff front?
Yeah, you nailed it. Back in September, the College Football Playoff Committee, they voted to expand the playoffs beginning in 2026. Well, there was always the option that they may move that up to 2024. Some things had to be worked out, working out with ESPN, who owns television rights, and then you got to work it out with all the bowl games who are part of the playoffs to agree to move it up to 2024. And most of the bowl games agreed to that. ESPN obviously agreed to that, an expanded playoff getting moved up to 2024. But the Rose Bowl was the big holdout. And finally, Thursday night, I believe Pete Thamel broke the news that the Rose Bowl had reached an agreement with the College Football Playoff Committee. And it seems like the College Football Playoff Committee told them either get on the bandwagon or you're going to be left off the bandwagon. And they agreed to move up the start date to 2024. So beginning in 2024, we'll have an expanded college football playoff, 12 teams.
12 teams. Interesting. Matt, are you a Florida fan?
No, I'm a USF fan.
USF. Is USF anywhere near the playoff scene?
God, no. We were like 1-10 this year.
So listen, should they go to 12 teams? We can have that debate on a different show, but just know that it is imminent. Okay. So while we're here, let's see if we can sneak this one in. Of teams that are going to the college football playoff this year in the smaller format, we had a big game this past week with Michigan and Ohio State. Michigan proved victorious. We mentioned this as a cliff note, really in our, we saw the breaking news right as we were recording our podcast last week that the Michigan brawl had resulted in criminal charges. So we did talk about that. Matt, any updates on that front? It was a Michigan State brawl. Any updates on that front?
What I think was the reason charges were filed because it was on video. I've watched it probably 10 times. And what the problem is with filing charges just based on a video is you don't know what happened before the video and you don't really know what happened. It looked like a scuffle. And if I'm watching that in a jury box, I'm like, what are we doing here? Why were charges filed on this? This looks like a game that was highly emotional, boiled over into the tunnel. Potentially maybe some misdemeanors, but I saw somebody got charged with a felony, and I think that's just a bridge too far. I honestly don't think, I think a lot of them are going to take pretrial diversion and have keep the cases dismissed, but I have a hard time thinking that we're going to go to trial on these cases and the prosecution is actually going to get a conviction, especially on the felony.
Okay, that brawl is between Michigan and Michigan State. All the players charged with respect to that fight, all of them, right? And this is why you're talking about what's on video, what's not on video. All of them are Michigan State players. There's a felonious assault charge, there's assault and battery charges, there's normal assault charges. Okay. No Michigan players whatsoever are charged in that incident. So we have news today, and I don't profess to be the biggest Michigan or Michigan State guy. I just report, we called it like we see it. Michigan State star Mazi Smith, who I believe is a defensive tackle. It's announced today, and we're recording this on Thursday, December 1st, that he's facing felony charges for carrying a concealed weapon. And that offense occurred on October 7th. So I believe the fight was like late October, right? Am I crazy? Or early November?
Yes.
So Matt, what I'm seeing here is that a county called the Washtenaw County Prosecutor's Office is the same office that issued the charges to the 7 Michigan State players. And it's also issuing these felony charges for the Michigan star Mazi Smith, this D tackle. Okay. So we have an early October 7th incident, and we have a later incident involving the scuffle. It seems to be more complicated. There's 7 players. There's video. Obviously, there's no video of, as far as we know, of this Michigan player, Mazi Smith. Can you perhaps get us into the eye of a prosecutor's office? How could it be? It seems like there's some form of like unusual delay with respect to Mazi Smith. Is it possible someone in the prosecutor's office is a Wolverines fan? Is it that simple?
The belief is that it shouldn't matter where anybody is, obviously. However, I think what the difference is when offices make a determination about filing charges, they usually are like, okay, what is easier to prove? A case is easier to prove. It's usually charged faster. For example, Jalen Kitna's case, it's going to take probably a week to 10 days for him to be formally charged because he admitted to it, because there's allegedly forensic evidence of it. This case is a little different. This is carrying concealed firearm. The Michigan player Smith, that usually has to go through the system, and everybody has to make sure that the case law is firm on that with carrying concealed firearms, stuff like that. Make sure that it was actually hidden, make sure it was actually a firearm, and they can prove that. And as opposed to the Michigan brawl, where it's on video and it's like, oh yeah, they did this. Oh, he battered this person. What are their numbers? This. Okay, charge them all. It all depends on how the office works. Usually, the quicker the state files charges, the stronger they think it is, or the easier they can prove. That's not always going to be the case. I don't think the Michigan State brawl is as slam dunk as they think it is, especially no matter if it's on video. I look at it, that doesn't seem like a real strong case to me. Jalen Kitna's case, that seems like a pretty strong case and probably will be charged pretty quickly. As to the Michigan involving Mazi Smith, it took like almost 2 months for them to file charges for carrying concealed firearm. That could also be that he wasn't arrested. And if he wasn't arrested, then until just recently, it doesn't start any speedy trial clocks. In Florida, once you get charged, you got on a felony, you got 175 days to try him. Otherwise, they can get a speedy trial and get the case dismissed. So I think that might have played into it in the Mazi Smith case.
Thinking back about what happened in the video and everything, do you see any potential charges coming out of that? I know there was talk of maybe some venue stuff going on. Those could be more civil charges and other things like that. But do you see any potential charges, whether criminal or anything civil, going on there?
Potentially civil, but as Dan always says, assumption of risk that could play into it. I think that maybe a couple battery charges, and that's really pushing it. When you're doing you're doing a battery case, you have 2 things. It's either has to be a domestic battery with injuries, meaning somebody hurt a significant other and their injuries, or it's a battery case that you can see on video that it's like, okay, this is exceptionally egregious. I watched the Michigan State one, and I look at it as a criminal defense attorney now, former prosecutor handling felony cases, and I just didn't seem to think that any jury would want a day or 2 of their lives upended by this case where they're looking at it like, this is your case. This is what the battery you bring to us. I think maybe a couple of them should have been charged, but I'm honestly, if I was still a prosecutor, I would have declined the whole case. I'm like, there's nothing here. There's too much going on, and there's nothing that screams, I need to file this case. Because when you're a prosecutor, you have discretion whether or not to file charges. I just don't think I would have filed charges there, and I don't really think a jury is going to care either.
I think that's a good place to end it. Matt, Landis, obviously we are all over the sports world today. Excellent job to both of you.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Dan.
So that was Matt Tympanick, our resident DA, and Landis Barber. You can find them both on conductdetrimental.com. And Matt has actually been on Law and Crime a bunch. So if you're a fan of that network, or if you haven't heard of it, Matt is all over the place there. Okay, so welcome back, Evan and Stephanie. We will finish our conversation. Reminder, our podcast sponsored by Themis Bar Review, top bar prep company in the galaxy. Evan, what year are you in school? Remind me.
I am a 2L.
Do you know what I'm about to ask you?
I know. Have I started prepping for the bar?
It's one of the questions I'm about to ask you. What's the answer to that question?
I have not.
Okay, when you do, who are you using for your bar prep?
Well, obviously Themis. It's the best one.
Obviously Themis. I rest my case. Why Themis?
Well, it's just the best one that's available, and you can get a discount code using our code.
Evan, you just absolutely read my mind. Evan, you've now risen very high in the conduct detrimental rankings. So you're way up there. There are some people that shall not be named in our circles that are using a company that shall not be named. So they're way down in my ranking. So if you like sports law, you like us, you'll use our promo code conduct, you'll help us out. That's the best way to support the show. In addition to giving us a 5-star review. Again, we are a completely independent show, so we have no advertising platforms behind us. So if you share the show, you help our sponsors out. That's the best way to support us. Okay. So let us finish here. A topic that we've covered for almost legitimately a year and a half, 2 years, the Deshaun Watson saga. Deshaun Watson, this is his big return to action. A lot of our listeners came from our Deshaun Watson coverage, so a lot of people are familiar with it. We'll break down maybe the highest level form. But Deshaun Watson comes back after an 11-week suspension. The Cleveland Browns, not coincidentally, at least if you ask me, are playing the Houston Texans. So this is a game where, it's kind of a homecoming game. It's the return of Deshaun Watson. Will the Boo Birds be out? We saw, at some point in time, Deshaun Watson try to play in Jacksonville. He'd play a preseason game and got booed off the field. He did not play well. We're not going to talk. I'll leave that to Conlan in his segment to talk about how the Browns game might go. But Stephanie, let's start with you. What do you think about Deshaun Watson returning to the field in less than a year? Are you okay with that? You think it was too short, too long?
I'll say they went through the process and that was the outcome that, basically they agreed to. The decision-making authority made their decision and that's what it is. Do I agree with it? Not necessarily. I have a fairly strong opinion, but I think I've reflected that on some prior episodes, so we won't get into it now. It is what it is. But, I do find it quite interesting that Tony Buzbee did come out and say that 10 of the accusers are going to be sitting with him in a suite at the game because it is at Houston Texans. So, I think that there's a lot to be said about this, and it's going to be very interesting hearing the fans and their reaction to his return. I also saw earlier that at his press conference today, Deshaun Watson basically started out by saying, with my legal team and my clinical team, there's only football questions that I can address at this time. Not that he's addressed anything particularly in the past, more straightforward, but, I think it's going to be interesting. And it just, makes it even better that it's going to be against his former team.
Steph, I'm only laughing because the MLB network stuff has to be very political here. You have to toe the company line, which I think you did well, right? There was a decision that was made. Can we be that upset with it? If the NFL and Deshaun Watson agreed to that suspension, no, I think we could be a lot more upset if the NFL instituted a certain suspension that didn't reflect reality upwards or downwards, but we had a agreed upon suspension here. Now, do leagues do things that sometimes we don't necessarily agree with? I think here was an odd one, right? If memory serves, and Evan, I know you were in the weeds of this as well. The independent judge that was appointed, Sue Robinson, actually gave him Deshaun Watson 6 games. And then the NFL actually, ramped that up. They wanted to suspend him for a full year and they end up, agreeing to 11 games. So you can't really get so mad at the NFL because they upped the suspension. You can't get really mad at Deshaun Watson for wanting less because Judge Robinson gave him less. So, it's never going to be an ideal scenario. I know people that don't think Deshaun Watson should ever play down a football again. And I have other people that say, you appointed an independent judge and the independent judge said it was 6 games. So, why is it anything longer than that? So see it both ways. It is an oddity, one that I'm not familiar with, where a player with such a lightning rod for controversy is returning to play in the same season. And Stephanie, to the point that you just raised, we spent a lot of time in the last month talking about the Kyrie Irving saga. A lot was made about Kyrie has to apologize publicly in order to get, to come back to the field.
Yep.
Deshaun Watson?
If my memory serves me correctly, I'm not sure he has ever, straight up publicly apologized for what he did. I think he more so apologized for, in his words, if I remember correctly, again, I'm not entirely sure, is that he apologized for making the women feel uncomfortable.
And for triggering people.
Yes, but not for his actual actions.
I had a couple articles on the Watson stuff. It's kind of hard to not write about it because it's so in depth. It's such a unique scenario. I don't, at least in my lifetime, I don't remember an athlete having such a bulk of accusations. So I think that's where a lot of this stems from. Personally, I thought a full year suspension would have been more appropriate. But like you said, they went through the process, they brought the independent judge, and then they upped it. So yeah, I think that the Buzbee bringing the accusers to the game is an odd move. I get the sentiment of like,
We should talk about that, Evan. The Buzbee has announced that there's bringing the accusers to the game.
Yeah, so he's bringing 10 accusers, and I get the sentiment of, we're not going to forget. We're not going to let people forget. We're not going to let you forget, you as in Deshaun Watson. But it seems odd to bring accusers to watch the accused play football and potentially be successful on the field. So I don't know what the marketing strategy is there. I don't know what Buzbee's really thinking. It should be an interesting situation, at least, to watch. And I guess Watson's first game back, that'll be interesting to watch. I'm sure there'll be plenty of fans outside of Cleveland rooting against him.
I'm going to give you one that's interesting just to close the loop on the Watson stuff. Like, there was a settlement that was reached as far as we know. We're not sure how much money was paid, this, that, and the other. But like, what I find odd is that like when you have a settlement, usually some amount of money is paid. I imagine that's what happened here. We're never going to know how much. But in terms of like the settlement and release, you usually add something called like a non-disparagement clause. Like, hey, I'm giving you this amount of money. The case is over, but you also can't speak negatively about me in the press. So this seems to be, I don't know if they're speaking negatively against him. And obviously the clients can't, through their lawyers, speak negatively. They have terms that say like the person can't speak bad, or their agents, or, or anyone like that. Now, attending a game that Deshaun Watson is playing in, it's not speaking negatively about someone. Probably, it certainly sends a message. Like Evan, like as you were saying, like we're going to make sure you don't forget about this. Like that's the message it's sending. I don't know. Maybe there was some poor draft. Let's like the three of us, right? Steph, you're admitted. Evan, you're soon to be lawyer. Like, do you think they could have put in that settlement agreement like hey, you're not allowed to attend a game that Watson attends? Like I feel like they could have done that.
Yeah, I think that you can pretty much write whatever you want into a contract. It's just a matter of whether the other side is actually going to agree to it or not. And, in a settlement agreement of this nature, you probably would want to make sure that you're covering all of your bases. So I think maybe that was a missed opportunity for Deshaun Watson's side, and whether they actually did try doing that, we don't know. But clearly Buzbee did not agree to it, and the accusers did not agree to it, because we know what's happening on a Sunday.
That would be the second clause that should have been put into the Deshaun Watson agreement. The other one, maybe that he should be staying away from all massage parlors for the history of humanity, or outside team masseuses. That was, if memory serves, right, it was put in Judge Robinson's order from the NFL disciplinary hearing. It was not put in Watson's contract, even though, right, the Kyler Murray homework clause made its way into the Kyler Murray contract. So I don't know, oddities. Okay, let's end with this, guys. What to watch for? We do it. We try to talk about things that are on the horizon, things to watch. I think on the last episode, I gave you guys the Leonard versus PepsiCo, the Harrier Jet story. So documentaries are open here. Steph, let's lead off with you. Anything on your plate?
I actually just finished watching the FIFA Uncovered documentary on Netflix. So kind of going back to how politics can get involved in soccer, that was an interesting documentary to watch. If you follow the FIFA scandal in 2015, I believe it really spells out exactly what happened. And it was kind of interesting to really get a full understanding of the behind the scenes and the apparent corruption that, the documentary really did highlight some clear evidence on that. And obviously some former members were indicted. So I highly would recommend watching that, especially since we're in the World Cup era right now. It was definitely an interesting one to watch. And then another one that I actually just started is Inside Man on Netflix. Very, very good show.
What is Inside Man? You can't just say the name and recommend it. What's it about?
It's essentially a guy who is on death row, and he on the side kind of helps people solve cases from his jail cell, essentially.
Okay. I think that's sufficient. Okay. I'm intrigued. Evan, you don't have to do documentaries. You could do sports. You could do whatever you want.
Yeah, so I'll actually take it back a little personal note. I'm a Ravens fan, for those who don't know. Lamar Jackson been in the headlines for his contract and for his good play on the field. And then recently, following a brutal loss to the Jaguars, ruined my Sunday. He had some mean fan tweets, as you would expect. And he took the time out of his day to respond to one of those tweets in a way that some might find offensive. He said, quote, "E-Day," and I think you can fill in the blank there. And an ESPN Baltimore reporter, I'm not going to put the name out there, wrote a story. And I got the notification on my phone saying that Lamar Jackson had said a homophobic slur on Twitter. Now, obviously, that is a big deal if it was true, because people get suspended for that. People lose their jobs for that. So a big accusation. And then Lamar responded to that the next day, tweeting at the guy saying, "That's a defamatory statement. You defamed my name. Delete the tweet, delete the story." I don't think legal action will come of it, but just a little note on Twitter as something that hit close to home as a Ravens fan.
He tweeted at the reporter to take it down.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so it might be semantics, but like people can find the tweet if you just look up Lamar Jackson deleted tweet. It's not a homophobic slur that he used, but it certainly is a homophobic insult of some sort, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would think so. I do think using it in that way is painting it in a negative light, for sure.
I mean, we talk about in defamation like good amount, right? We could talk about public figures, private figures, all this fun stuff. But at the end of the day, no matter who you're dealing with, the truth is an absolute defense. Or you maybe you're not making the exact assertion. So sometimes it could be, hey, that wasn't a factual assertion. Certainly, a homophobic slur is a factual assertion. It's not someone's opinion, but like it's kind of close. Like when you just said that, like I'm like, Lamar Jackson got pretty close to making a homophobic slur if he didn't directly say it. Evan, you're the Ravens fan here. I mean, do you think the truth is an absolute defense applies here? Do you think he used a homophobic slur?
I don't know if I would go as far to say he used a homophobic slur. I think it's an inappropriate comment to say, especially in a public forum. And because he does have a pretty large social media following, I don't know. I was unhappy about the response. I think it's immature, and I think it's not something I want to see from a public figure. It's close. I mean, if they really wanted to get into a legal battle, I'm sure there'd be litigation about that. Personal opinion, I don't think I would consider that a slur. I think I'd consider it a very inappropriate phrase.
He made a comment that I think had homophobic connotations, but slur I think implies, like, if we're really getting technical here, it implies one particular word. And if you like read that tweet out, like a bad word for a discriminatory word to use against somebody, one particular bad word does not appear in that sentence. Like there's no one word that's going to get blurred, it's going to get blurred out in isolation. Evan, that was a good one. I didn't know about that defamation story. Very interesting. Was that just big in Baltimore? I don't know if they got picked up so nationally.
Well, I mean, I did get the notification on my phone. I don't know if that was an ESPN like national notification or it's because I have Ravens notifications on, but if you had the ESPN app, that might have popped up on your phone, and I saw it trending on Twitter, and then obviously Lamar's follow-up tweet really brought it to my attention. So, I would imagine at least people in the NFL sphere have some awareness of that.
We talked about it with Kyrie Irving like a couple of weeks ago, like what an athlete shouldn't do, right? Like Lamar Jackson shouldn't be tweeting at haters. Like that's never going to go well. My what to watch for, I'll do this one pretty quick. My dad was a very big Willie Mays fan growing up. There is a Say Hey Willie Mays documentary on HBO. If anybody's into the Jackie Robinson story about what he did for Major League Baseball, there were obviously players that were not the first to deal with discrimination in Major League Baseball, but players that came right after him, players that came from the Negro Leagues. And maybe people don't realize this, but like for every Jackie Robinson, there's a guy like Larry Doby, who was the first African-American player in the American League. And Willie Mays, maybe people don't know this, but played in the last Negro League World Series, or their equivalent of the World Series. And then he played in, went to San Francisco when there was a lot of hate and bigotry because once upon a time, Joe DiMaggio was like a San Francisco guy, and people really didn't like Willie Mays, dealt with a lot of discrimination and, racial profiling in San Francisco. So it's a good story. And obviously it gets into a lot of the Barry Bonds stuff. Willie Mays was Barry Bonds' godfather. A little bit of a steroids controversy, but, story for another time.
Mm-hmm.
And then separately, Shaq has a new documentary out on HBO.
I saw that.
He is very good. It is very, very good. Not as much sports law stuff, but Shaq is a ultimate businessman. So I don't know. I don't want to spoil it. They're both very good. But if you're into the more modern stuff, Shaq, if you're into the more classical sports law stuff, the Willie Mays doc was excellent. Okay, Evan, Steph, excellent job. Without further ado, let us kick it over to our friend Conlan Farrell. We do it each and every week. It is the Bettor Edge betting segment with Conlan Farrell. Conlan, 8-2-1. How does it feel, buddy?
Feels fantastic. Listen, I told you I had a rough week over Thanksgiving. The Vikings getting slaughtered 40-3, but right back on that horse. I went to Old Reliable, the New York Football Jets this year, coming in and just beating the Bears up and down the field. It wasn't ever close. Mike White is the savior. He's the new man in East Rutherford. So listen, I feel real good. 8-2-1. Not too shabby. Not too shabby at all.
You're not a Zach Wilson guy? No?
No, I've moved on from Zach Wilson entirely. I never was high on him in the beginning. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt every step of the way. Listening to his post-game presser after the just anemic performance he displayed in New England and losing that football game, I'm out. I'm fully out on Zach Wilson.
Okay. Well, Conlan, you are always, you're always a treat to have on. 8-2-1 certainly helps. Our sponsors of the segment, Bettor Edge, is the social betting platform. Conlan, as we do each and every week, you peruse their site. It's not a normal house. It's random, bettors like you and I putting up their own lines, putting up their own odds, and daring us as the public to try to outpace them. So, Conlan, right now you are 8-2-1. Again, use our promo code Conduct, get $20 over there. Conlan, where does your eye take you this week?
You know what, Dan? It kind of ties in. Everything ties into sports law with us here at Conduct Detrimental. So it actually takes me down to Houston, where Deshaun Watson will be making his 2022 NFL debut. He was obviously our favorite topic this offseason to talk about for many reasons, obviously the civil lawsuits and all that. But let's go back. Let's play football now, right? That's all in the past. Listen, however, though, Tony Buzbee is going to be having a suite, I hear, down there in Houston at the game with some of the victims. But let's just take it. Let's stick on our Bettor Edge segment here. And I'm actually going to take the Cleveland Browns with Deshaun Watson at quarterback -6.5. They play a bad Houston football team who's kind of all but packed it in for the season. You don't know Davis Mills, Kyle Allen. Between the two of them, neither of them are good. So I like the Browns here. Listen, I expect Watson to be rusty, but there's just too much talent on that side of the football for me not to see them beating them by at least a touchdown. So Cleveland Browns -6.5 on the road in Houston. The Watson return game going back down to Houston. I think it'll be interesting. A lot of underlying storylines, but at the end of the day, the whistle's going to blow. They're going to play 60 minutes of football, and I think the Browns win by at least a score.
What do you think the line was if it was Jacoby and not Deshaun?
Maybe 4.5. I still think the Browns are clearly a better team. Maybe 4.5. I thought Jacoby Brissett actually played really well in the time he was at the helm for the Cleveland Browns. He came in, he was the stabilizer. He did exactly what they needed him to do. Listen, the Browns are still hanging around. They're not great. They come off a big win last week against Tampa Bay. So they're still hanging around in the mix. And you had a guy like Deshaun Watson, who is the highest paid quarterback of all time, let us remind you, now with his massive deal in Cleveland. So listen, they have a weapon at quarterback. Jacoby Brissett, he did what he needed to do. He didn't play outside himself. So Cleveland Browns they're trending up at the right time. Let's see if they can string some wins together at the end of the year here.
He's got the highest guarantee, not the highest paid quarterback, but the point is taken. Conlan,
who's the highest paid quarterback then?
I think Mahomes got a $500 million deal, but
okay, all right.
Mahomes could earn more over the life.
Well, that's why we keep you lawyers around. Keep checks like me on it.
Yeah, that's what we do. So for those that don't remember, the last time Deshaun Watson saw a playing field was against the Jacksonville Jaguars in a preseason game. The fans there were chanting some pretty heinous things in him. And I don't think Watson played that well. Obviously, it was a preseason game. With them returning to Houston, I can only imagine, right, the stuff that Houston fans are going to say about Deshaun Watson. It should certainly be much more hostile territory. Conlan, it is a bold pick for some reasons, but then not again so bold because the Houston Texans are the worst team in the league. But 6.5, still 6.5. So, Conlan, I wish you the best of luck. I can't say I like the pick because of my prior statements against Deshaun Watson, but listen, I respect.
Listen, I'm not advocating. I'm not going to be in a 3-legged sack race with the guy, but listen, I'm picking him to win a football game.
I'm not going to root for him. How about that?
Okay.
How about that? I'm not rooting for the Cleveland Browns. It is what it is. Conlan, if you go, 9-2-1, no one asks about your prior wins. We make fun of you for a little bit of your prior losses. Obviously, we remember that the Bills loss, which shall not be mentioned, but all good, Conlan. Hey, so congrats to you on your 8-2-1 record so far as we near the end of the season. Conlan, excellent job. And that'll do it for another episode of Conduct Detrimental. For myself, Dan Wallach, the entire gang here at Conduct. We will see you next time on another episode of Conduct Detrimental.